There are a few things that that you guys have to be aware of in general, and that is that if you're in Osek Patul, now is when you have to really start getting your income definitely uh, uh, in order, but also your expenses. This is a good time to sit down and look back at 2020 because you weren't required to file anything up until now for 2020. You may or may not have been making Bituach Leumi payments monthly, but that was just based on some kind of estimate. Not like Bituach Leumi had a report from you regarding your 2020 income. And now's the time to sit down and make sure that you have everything in order for your 2020 reporting. The Osek Patul first required report is now. It's required by the end of January. Due to the lockdown that's coming up, the more serious lockdown than the one we're in now, that may be postponed, but don't count on it. Make sure to file by the end of January. You don't want to mess with the tax authorities. And that's in general. You don't want to mess with the tax authorities. Okay. If you're in Osek Mulshe, you have a deadline every 2 months anyway, because you have to report your income and expenses to Ma'am every 2 months anyway. So you're probably more on top of things when it comes to at least the VAT, including income and expenses. But now is also a good time to go through everything, make sure you really reported everything throughout the year. You have all 12 cell phone bills, for example, or internet bills. You have all 6 Arnona bills. You have all 6 electricity bills. You know, everyone in the periodic timing of their expenses. Okay, I'm scrolling through the chat here. I see that a lot of people here are.
So I see we have mostly Osek Pator, and the Osek Morshe. Most of the Osek Morshe I'm seeing are in an industry where they have to be Osek Morshe, so it doesn't necessarily say much about the size of their business. Not that, that's why we're asking, because we're more interested in the kind of documentation you need to keep, but we're dealing with mostly smaller businesses and mostly services is what I'm seeing through the chat. Thanks for sharing.
Great.
And we definitely have some newbies here.
Yeah, okay, great. So if this is your first year filing, then we're very happy you're here because you'll be starting off hopefully in order. And if it isn't, then I hope that we'll still have some extra tips for you guys. It's always good to hear again what is actually going on. So let's just skim through the different tax authorities and what they want from your lives and who wants you to report what, when, and all kinds of things like that.
We can make these slides available. So if Chana skims through things pretty quickly, we can make them available afterwards so you can review it more thoroughly.
Okay. So when you open your business, you basically started out by going to Ma'am, and that's where they determined if you're going to be an Osek Patur or an Osek Molshe. Even if you're a company, an LTD, you still be registered as an Osek Mulshe also at Ma'am. The difference between Osek Patul and Osek Mulshe is, first of all, whether you have to charge your clients VAT, and then that would also affect how often you have to report to Ma'am. So Osek Patul, we said, has to file once a year by the end of January regarding total income in the previous tax year from January through December. So now in January 21, we're reporting total income from January through December 2020. And the purpose of this report is to make sure that you didn't go above the Osek Patul limit, which in 2020 was 100,491 shekel. We're only talking about your income before deducting any expenses, everything you issued a receipt for, basically. That's an Osek Patul. Your accountant is probably going to be asking you also for your expenses for 2020. That's just so we're already in touch. So it's a good time to start preparing everything we need, the groundwork we need for the tax return that we'll only be able to prepare in a few months. But really what we need to report now is your total income in 2020. Now is the time a lot of people find out, if they weren't keeping track during the year, first of all, how much income they generated, and also if they passed the limit. I have a few clients who, when we prepare their Atzarat Osek Patul, they realize that, oh, we made more than 100,000 shekel this year. Okay, that's great, But now we have to transition into becoming an osek morshe. Okay. An osek morshe, unlike the osek patur, has to file a report every 2 months. The report is basically made up of the ma'am that's received by from your clients. I'm not going to go into whether you have to charge foreign clients VAT or not and how that works. But in general, you're reporting your income, you're reporting the ma'am you received, and you're deducting from that the VAT that's included in your Israeli expenses, so that you're basically paying the difference to ma'am every 2 months. Okay. The way to do that. Yeah, sorry.
I'd really like to see if also in the chat, if you could say if you take a lot of transactions in a different currency, if you could just say yes or something in the chat. Thanks. You can go back.
Okay. Now, part of the tax requirements are, besides reporting to ma'am, also to have what's called bookkeeping done. So if an osek patur, their requirements are made up of 2. 1, issue a receipt every time you receive payment, and 2, keep all of your expenses in a folder. An osek morshe is required to actually keep a log, keep books, and they have to be done in a way that's not just an Excel sheet. It has to be either a program that's approved by Mas Haknasa, or it has to be done, using pen and paper, which I hope you're not doing. If you have an accountant preparing your VAT reports for you, they're also taking care of the bookkeeping for you and making sure that you're okay on that front, and you answer all the requirements from Mas Haknasa's standpoint. Okay. Now, what we didn't speak about are how you're issuing your receipts or how you're issuing your cheshboniot mas kabbalah. There are 2 options to do this. One is to use paper receipts, and then you have to have your business name, your name, your osek patur, osek morshe number on them, all kinds of other details like that. The other option is to use a digital program, but that program must be approved by Mas Haknasa. You can't use QuickBooks, you can't use all kinds of foreign programs, even though they may be more convenient and more accessible. You have to use an Israeli approved program because they have all kinds of requirements and things like that.
So I have a question. If somebody has a small business, small enough where they could potentially be writing paper receipts, maybe it's not worthwhile yet for them to invest in one of the approved programs, they could still also keep an Excel or something, right?
Yeah, the Excel is, you can always have additional spreadsheets or things like that, but you need the basic requirements. You need to follow the basic requirements for Mas Haknasa. Anything additional is a bonus.
So we're going to be talking a bit about why some sort of electronic is going to be very beneficial.
Yeah. I actually, regarding the online programs, there are some free programs. If the business is relatively small, you're not issuing too many receipts, there are programs that don't charge you anything for using them, and they're approved by Mas Haknasa. It's just, they're in Hebrew, so that may be a challenge on that front. But I think the biggest plus to using the digital receipt option is that you always have your running total in front of your eyes. You always know exactly where you are when it comes to the osek patur limit. You also know where you're standing pretty much for where you're bituach leumi purposes, and we're going to talk about that when we get to bituach leumi. And you're really more on top of things, I think, when it comes to what's going on during the year, especially when you're in osek patur. Then if it's just, writing receipts on paper and not actually keeping track of your running total, I have to sit down once in a while and go through all of the receipts to make sure that you know what your total actually is. Mm-hmm. There are much less surprises this way. Okay.
And then there's lots of things that have deadlines. So if you don't know what your income is during the year, you're not going to be able to meet those deadlines to know if you qualify for certain things. So it is really, really worthwhile to have everything electronic so you can very quickly see So we just wanted to really quickly go through the rest of the obligations so we don't bore the people who are more experienced, and then we'll get into the juicy stuff. You are required, this has been 3 years now, when did the requirement start to put in that people that Atzmaim are actually required to contribute to pensions for themselves?
Yeah, since 2017, actually. 2017 was the first year that there was a requirement, but they said that if people didn't contribute, they won't give them penalties. So let's say 2017 was like a
practice year.
Practice year. That's a good way to put it. From 2018, if your average monthly profit, which means income after deducting expenses, is at least minimum wage, which today is 5,300 shekel a month, you are required to contribute to pension as an atzma'i. The percentages you have to contribute are about 4.5% of the first about 5,000 shekel a month of profit, and then about 12.5% for every shekel above that, and up to the average monthly wage in Israel, which today is about 11,000 shekel. So if you're earning more than 11,000 shekel a month, the maximum contribution you have to make to pension during the year is a little less than 11,000 shekel total. Okay, there are other reasons to contribute to pension that have benefits, but if we're trying to just avoid the penalties, the maximum contribution you would have to make is 11,000 shekel. In order to set up a pension fund, you have to either speak directly with the insurance companies or speak to your insurance agent. You don't have to make a monthly contribution to pension. There may be benefits to that you should discuss with the insurance agent, because there are risk factors involved and life insurance and things like that. You could make just an annual contribution, not on December 31st, please. But you could, let's say, sit down in November, look at your actual profit for the year, see what you're expecting for the next 2 months, and then make a lump sum contribution. That's fine for tax purposes. That's fine. Your insurance agent may say something else. Now, if you want to make a larger contribution, that's okay. Nobody's going to say no, and the pension funds will be very happy to accept your money as well. There may be additional tax benefits to that, because the actual contribution can give you either a deduction, so it's like part of it is considered like another expense, and it will lower your taxes, and part of the contribution would give you a tax credit, which basically is like a discount on your taxes. Okay, so if you are required to contribute to pension anyway, speak to an insurance agent about setting that up, and speak to them about, between the insurance agent and your accountant, what the ideal contribution would be in your case, so that you take advantage of the full tax credits and benefits that you can get, plus actually, figure out how much money you'll get when you retire.
If you're a U.S. citizen, please speak with your U.S. accountant. Hopefully you're using a professional U.S. accountant in Israel who understands these things. Please speak with them before you make more than the minimum contributions. Any atzma'i making contributions to a pension has some interesting tax issues. I don't want to tell everyone to run to their accountant, but if you're planning to make more than the minimum, definitely speak with your accountant. If you're planning to put into a Karen Hishtalmut, discuss these things with your accountant so you understand the issues. I'm starting a little list over on the side of some information we can give you afterwards. So I'm guessing that Chana has a list of those approved programs. So maybe she can share those in IWEN or something, or
I can tell you some names now. It's there's YPay, the letter Y, then the word pay, COIL. There's invoice.rivhit, RIVHIT, also COIL. I think my office guy also allows you to issue a few receipts a month free of charge. Each of those is limited to a certain amount of receipts that they give you without charging you for the use of the program. So you look into them, and then you'll be able to figure out which one works best for you. Green Invoice is not a free program. It has a great interface. I have a lot of clients who use it and are very happy with it, but it's not free. So,
It does English though. I mean, not English interface, but it does do completely English receipts if you want. And then I see a couple of people in the chats are asking about insurance brokers. I think Chana and I both have some people we can probably recommend. So you'll get our emails after. I'll email everybody after with our contact information, so you can go ahead and reply if you want that information. We are not planning to spam you. You're not going to start getting our newsletters just because you signed up for this. I don't have time to do a newsletter, but you'll have our contact information if you want. Yeah, if you actually want to contact us, you'll have that information. And then I think just really quick before we get into that, we're going to wrap up with what is income. So when you have wages from an employer in Israel, if that's all you have, and Chana, stop me if I say anything wrong, you don't need to be filing. If you only have wages from an Israeli employer, you don't usually need to be filing an Israeli tax return. As soon as you get some sort of income that isn't already reported to the Israeli government, that's usually what triggering some sort of an Israeli tax requirement. So everybody here is probably Osek Pator, Osek Morshe, because they have atzmai income, some sort of self-employment from a business. But it is good to keep in mind that there are a number of kinds of income, and you should keep these in mind and know what income is and talk to your accountant about. So if your parent sends you a birthday present, that's not income. If someone gives you a present to do your work, something you do, let's say you do tutoring and someone gives you a present to tutor their son, that's actually income. So think about those things. Bartering is income. And rental income, a lot of things. If you sell something for a gain, when you sell it, then you have what we call realized gains. If the value went up, so things like that. Does not have to do specifically with cash or where you're getting paid or how you're getting paid. So a lot of people ask me, is it better to get paid into the US or in Israel? I don't care. You can get, I don't say I don't care. I care about everybody, but it doesn't matter for tax purposes where you get paid. Usually my answer is get paid where you want to have your money. So you could get paid in rice into your bank account on Timbuktu. If you're doing the work in Israel, if you're breathing Israeli air while you're doing the work, you need to report that income to Israel. So even if you have clients on Mars, you have to report all of that income to Israel. It's based on what you're doing. You're doing work. You're probably hopefully getting paid for it with some sort of a benefit, whether that's cash, credit card, whatever. It's income, and you need to make sure you're figuring out how you're reporting that.
And also, Yosefa, it's not just an issue of your being in Israel when you're working. If you aren't within the first 10 years of Aliyah, you could be anywhere in the world generating income that's also considered Israeli taxable income. So even if you go abroad for a month or two, you go visit your family and you're working from there, you still have to report that income in Israel. You still have to issue receipts for it, unless you're within the first 10 years of Aliyah, and that's a whole different story. You see, your life is a little simpler in that front. But just for the first 10 years, that's it. I just want to talk about expenses for a minute, okay? Now, I know for mom purposes, if you're an Osek Patul, we said you aren't reporting your expenses in the Hatzarat Osek Patul, you're just reporting your revenue from the year, but the expenses are still important. And they're important for two reasons. One, for tax purposes, Mas Haknasa is going to be looking at your profit plus any other sources of income you have in order to determine whether or not you owe tax. And you may be an Osek Patul, but you may still owe tax. You're not exempt from paying taxes. You're not exempt from paying Bituach Leumi. You're only exempt from charging your clients the 17% ma'am. And even if you don't owe tax, if you have enough credits to not have to pay tax, you still probably have to pay Bituach Leumi. And Bituach Leumi is also looking at your profit when they determine whether or not you actually have to pay Bituach Leumi and how much Bituach Leumi you have to pay. So all these expenses are important, unless your income is very, very, very minimal and you're working less than 12 hours a week in your business for Bituach Leumi purposes, okay?
I want to just touch on a few questions that we have to this point. Adi wants to know if the required pension contributions are deductible, or is it only over the required minimum that's deductible?
All pension contributions are deductible depending on how high your actual Atzma'i income is. It's up to 16% of your Atzma'i income will have an effect on your taxes, the contribution of up to 16%. So if you contribute more than that, if you make a 20% contribution or you make a less than that, only up to 16% will have an effect on your taxes.
Okay. Lilach wants us to know, I think she's saying that the first 50 invoices on Green Invoice can be free under a trial, so you might not necessarily need to pay right away. Let's see, if you didn't issue invoices for every sale, can you go back? So we're going to talk about that. And technically, yes, but we hope to convince you that you shouldn't. Yes, there's a tax credit for pensions, as she said. Let's see. If I know I didn't reach the limit for OSEC Patur, do I need to worry about collecting my expenses? Again, technically, strictly required. You might not need to, or at least might not necessarily need to keep up with it on a monthly basis, but we hope to convince you that it is worthwhile to do as often as possible. As far as US citizens married to non-US citizens, happy to talk privately about it. I think it's not, I can't think of anything that's super, super relevant as far as just, in the context of business. If you didn't make Aliyah, but you're here on a spousal visa, I would think it can be difficult to be legally reporting if you're not legally allowed to work, but maybe you want to handle that privately. I don't know. Do you want to take that question privately?
If you're going to have a business in general, you need to have a working visa at least. Okay. If you didn't make Aliyah, this is a benefit for Olim Chadashim. So if you didn't officially make Aliyah, you're considered a resident for Israeli tax purposes. You have to report your income from all sources here.
Okay. Someone wants to know if working less than a certain number of hours means no tax. Absolutely not. First of all, Israel has no minimum requirement to file, which is a huge frustration for me. I think it's a little silly. I think personally, it's a little pet peeve of mine because I think it encourages people to avoid taxes when they're just making whatever random minimum they think is not worth reporting. But if you make under a certain amount of money, then yes, it's possible you wouldn't owe taxes, but you still have to report. There's no minimum where you don't need to report. And then at what point you owe taxes is going to depend on a number of your personal situation having to do with nikudot and, which come from various things.
The hours factor actually counts towards Bituach Leumi.
Oh, thank you.
They have two kinds of self-employed people for Bituach Leumi purposes. Those who work less than 12 hours a week on average, for example, and earn less than a certain amount of money, a certain amount of profit, may be considered just like passive business owners for Bituach Leumi purposes, and then you may not have to pay Bituach Leumi. There won't be a minimum payment to Bituach Leumi, but you really should speak to your accountant specifically about your situation. If you aren't paying Bituach Leumi on your business, you also won't be entitled to Bituach Leumi benefits. And Bituach Leumi benefits are mainly maternity leave, if that's relevant, and a disability insurance, which could be very relevant for a lot of people. So that's where the amount of hours comes in. It doesn't affect anything for tax purposes or ma'am purposes. You'd still be Osek Patur, Osek Molshe. You'd still have to file a tax return every year. You'd still have to report everything. The situation is the same. It's just that Bituach Leumi may treat it as passive income and not as business income.
Okay. So let's get into actually putting together the numbers. So I'm gonna go over what I think are some of the benefits to try to convince you to keep up with this as much as possible, and Chana can give us some of the details. So as an OSEC Patur, many of you, I assume, are hoping you're going to make as much money as possible, maybe. And you need to know exactly when you hit OSEC Morshet. That's only one of many reasons, but you have to know exactly, because I do see people asking on IWEN, hey, I didn't realize I was OSEC Morshet. Should I go back and invoice, for the 17% I was supposed to charge people? No. I mean, technically, I guess you could, but I'm going to think you're really unprofessional if you go back and say, hey, I know I told you there wouldn't be that, but I didn't realize I hit Osek Morshe. Please don't do that. You should know every single day you're running total. If you're using Green Invoice, I think it says it on the first screen. Right there, it tells you your total income that you're making, and you're going to need that to make all kinds of decisions about, do you need to contribute to your pension? Do you want to be growing your business? Are you covering your expenses? Are you covering the daycare that you might be paying? So you want to be knowing how much money you're making all the time. And so having a running total is really important. So if for whatever reason, doesn't seem like you have a lot of excuses not to use an online approved program, but if for whatever reason you're not using an approved program, you do want to be writing paper receipts, at least have something. Log in every single piece of income you make and every single expense. And then I think one thing that I think is really important is find a system that actually works for you. So look at your life, look at your habits, and find what system actually works in your case. So if you already have, let's say, Microsoft 365 suite, so Excel might be a good way to keep track of a lot of things. If you're an OSEC Pator, that could be a great way to keep track of all your expenses. If you have an iPhone, the iPhone probably has other things. Or if you do everything on Google, you have your Google Calendar and your Gmail and everything. So then look at Google Sheets, which you can share between your devices, and it pops up really quick on your phone and things like that. So find think of what you're currently doing that works. So let's say you're really good at keeping a shopping list. How are you keeping the shopping list that's working, and how can you bring that into your business? That it's a constant habit to be recording both your income and your expenses. You shouldn't be waiting until the end of the month or quarter or year to be writing all your invoices. You should be writing them really as soon as you get the money. You should be writing the receipts. Chana, please stop me if you want to jump in at any point.
Another reason you should be issuing receipts as soon as you receive payment, and that is that if there is an audit done by Mas Haknasa, that's what they're going to be looking for. They want to make sure you're issuing a receipt every time you receive payment, as soon as you receive payment. Otherwise, they can claim that you've been negligent and they don't trust you, and they're going to make up their own amount of how much income they think you really were earning. And you don't want to be in this situation at all, okay? Just regarding the grants this year, I see there was a question about the grants, and does relate to the Hatzarat Osek Patur. When you're reporting your income to Ma'am as an Osek Patur, if you don't have your accountant do this for you, make sure not to include the grants, the Corona grants, in your total revenue, because this is not considered revenue for Ma'am purposes, and it may be the point that will make you pass the Osek Patur limit, and it really isn't relevant for that. When it comes to Mas Haknasa, when it comes to the income tax, all the grants are taxable. They will be reported in your tax return, and they will count towards the tax that you have to pay for the year if there is a tax liability. One of the grants, we can receive 2 grants every 2 months. One of them, the Ishtatfut Be'hotzaot, the flat 3, 4, or 6,000 shekel every 2 months grant, that one also counts as income for Bituach Leumi purposes. So that would be counted towards your Bituach Leumi income that would affect your payments there.
Yeah. As far as expenses go, I find that some people have very small businesses and a lot of nikudot, and you have a bunch of kids, or for whatever reason you're not paying taxes. They don't keep track of expenses, and your Israeli accountant might not even ask you for expenses if they see that you're not going to owe taxes. I don't know the legality behind that. I just know in practice that I do see a lot of clients, my clients on the US side, where their Revach V'Hafsed does not include any expenses, because the accountant just says, well, they don't know what taxes anyway. So I want to bring up a few reasons why it's really worthwhile to keep track of expenses. Number one, you want to know how profitable your business is. So even if you're not owing taxes, you want to make sure you're not losing money. So that's one good reason. If you're a US citizen, you're going to need to report that. And as a US citizen, number one, you are required to report your expenses because overstating your income actually can increase certain refunds or increase the amount that you're putting into Social Security, which you might not think is a good thing. You might want to be reducing how much you put into Social Security. But on the other hand, Social Security could say, hey, you're doing Social Security fraud by overstating your income. So you actually have to report your expenses. And also, maybe maybe your income will shoot up near the end of the year, and then you'll be stuck at the end of the year saying, oh yeah, I did buy some software back in January, but I can't remember what it was. So I'd like to encourage you to find a habit that is every single workday, every single purchase you make, and think what works for you. And then you need to keep in mind two goals I kind of think of two goals with your expenses. Number one is that you don't miss any. And number two is getting them in a way easily to your accountant. So I want to take, for example, let's say you buy most things on paper receipts. Maybe if you deal with goods or, you're making jewelry. So you go to the jewelry store and they give you these dinky little paper receipts. So you have a shoebox or a garbage bag of all your receipts. Check number one, great job. You're not losing a single receipt. They're all in that garbage bag or that shoebox, but you don't know the total and you can't easily get to your accountant. And then the year is over and you have this stress of you have to sit down with the shoebox and put them in order and write down all of them. And maybe some of them have faded. So, it might hit that goal if you're not losing any, but you're not in a position where you can very quickly get all the information. So I'd like you this year, if you're not already there, to get to the point where, number one, you're not losing any income or expense. You're not losing track of any income or expenses. And number two, we could give you a pop quiz anytime during the year and you know all your expenses. You have them all written down in one place where you can hand them over to your accountant. Because especially if you're an OSEC Pator, stop me again if I'm wrong, but your accountant might not need your receipts. I think you're usually required to keep track of all of your receipts, but depending on what accountant you use and depending on your business structure, maybe they don't necessarily want to see all your receipts. I know as a US accountant, I don't. You want to jump in there, Chana?
I can tell you what we do at my office. We actually do want all the receipts, and Mas Hachnasa's requirements are to have the hard copies of everything. So unless you have all the hard copies and we can trust that you're inputting them correctly into some kind of digital format, we're actually going to need your paper receipts. I know it sounds a little backwards. We are in Israel, which is like high techy and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, when it comes to this, tax laws are still a little behind. But
you're not going to add them up, right?
Don't give us your garbage bag, okay? Put them in some kind of folder or sheet protector or something. I had a client who actually literally brought in a garbage bag one time. First of all, we weren't able to read half of the receipts there because they were all faded already and scrunched up. And second of all, I think it has an effect and it shows how what your attitude is towards your business. If you're treating your expenses like garbage, I hate to say it, but what does that mean? What does that say about how you're treating your business? Keep things in order for yourself also. And yeah, for Mas Hachnasa purposes, you have to have a printout of everything, including the digital receipts. Even if your accountant is willing to receive digital formats of things, you need to have a folder with everything in order and hard copy and able to find those things in case of an audit.
If someone is an OSEC Pator, are you going to be adding up all the receipts or do you want them to give you the totals per category?
Well, in general, we add up all the receipts here at my office because a lot of times, first of all, people don't always sit down and input their receipts into digital programs. And also, sometimes there are mistakes and sometimes you might think that the expense is really office supplies, but if we look at it, then we see that it's not office supplies, it's you purchased an asset and that has to be depreciated. So even if you do prepare some kind of spreadsheet, which is very helpful.
Mhm.
We still would like to see the actual receipts to make sure everything was recorded properly.
Okay.
And if we can save you the trouble of doing it yourself, then, why not?
Another benefit to recording your invoice, the money you're taking in on a daily basis is that you need to have the correct exchange rate. So yes, I mean, if you're using like Green Invoice and you do it retroactively, yeah, technically it is going to figure out the day that you earn the money. That's why, sorry, excuse me, I'm talking about different currencies. That's why I asked about what different currencies people are using, because for Israeli purposes, US is a bit more lenient with this. For Israeli purposes, as far as I understand, you need to use the exchange rate on the day that you're earning it. So if you are earning in different currencies, really it's worthwhile to use one of these programs like Green Invoice, which has all the daily conversion rates. You don't have to do any of the work yourself. It's all in there. You log in on a certain date and it tells you exactly what it is in shekels. So you do need to be, and then I see a lot in IWEN that people ask, oh no, I like put the date in wrong and now I can't go back. Don't get in that situation. Just do it every day. If you're sick, do it, as soon as you're not sick. Try to make it a daily habit. If it's, maybe when you're having your afternoon tea or something, you log all your payments, or when you check your bank account, once, whatever it is, once a day, you probably want to know who paid you. Do the receipts right away then. And if you find that you have a specific challenge in your business that you just can't get over, like checking your bank account and writing receipts, is your business big enough to hire somebody to do that? And hire somebody who's better at it to do it so it gets done. Because if you're not writing invoices, you're not getting paid. And if you're not writing receipts, it's just illegal. So don't do that. But like be on it, keep up with it so that it doesn't cause you stress at the end of the year. It shouldn't be causing you stress. If you're stressed out now about getting all your 2020 expenses to your accountant, think what you can do better in the coming year to be on top of your 2021 expenses constantly. Write the receipts. What I can tell you what I do in my business. So I do tax returns, obviously, if you haven't figured that out. And I write the invoice as soon as I finish the draft of the client's tax return, because that's when I'm in the client's file where I have the engagement letter and I have their price quote and everything is in the client's file. And I write the invoice right then at that point, and I send it usually minutes after I send their tax return, I send the invoice. And then I keep track of everything. You need to be keeping track, So I do have a client list, a project list where I do keep track of the status of the tax return, the status of the payments. And then I happen to, thank God I'm blessed to have an office manager who handles all the receipts and keep making sure and receipting things as they come in. But I do also keep track of getting paid separately. So I like to have that duplicate entry where he keeps track and I keep track. And then as far as expenses go, so as Chana said, for Israeli purposes, you have to print everything out. I can't wait till that ends. It's just ridiculous. But still, you want to keep track of it. So I think Green Invoice does let you keep track of expenses. But if I was a Nosec Pator, I think I would probably also have a running Excel sheet. So I'm going to just share my screen real quick and share something that I made that would work for a very small business. If you don't have something better that, works with the taxing authorities and everything. Let's see, share screen. So this is just something that I put together last year that I don't actually use, but I want to have it as an example of something you could use. So you have all the in Excel, if you set the format to accounting, so then it can turn all your expenses red and all your income black. So this is one way you could do it. You could have separate tabs for your income and your expenses, or in this case, if you're really just starting out, maybe you do just want to keep it all together, and then you can kind of get an idea of your total profit very quickly. At the bottom, you again figure out what works for you. And then in this particular sheet, I created it. It has like a lot of code sort of behind it, but I made something where you can actually have everything of all different currencies on the same sheet. So it converts it all behind the scenes. But one of the really important things that I wanted to bring up here is, as you're keeping track of it, you want to make sure you're keeping track of the categories. And when you're keeping track of your categories, you want to be using very consistent wording. So you don't want to call one thing advertisement and one thing advertising, because then when you go to sort it, they're not going to come together. You want to be very consistent. You don't want to have any extra spaces or dashes or anything. You want to have a set list of your expenses and call them consistent things. So you can see here, I did this in Excel with data validation, which if you don't know how to use it, just Google data validation. It's pretty easy. You do a list and it pulls from somewhere basically. And so I made this list that you have to pick from. And that keeps you from messing up your list with spelling mistakes, because I don't want to miss an expense because I'm sorting and something is spelled incorrectly. I just want to give you an example. So let's say I want to know how much I paid for insurance. I can go over here and I can search insurance. Now, if I'd spelled one of these wrong, it's not going to come up. Or I want to know only my income, so I can do that. Or, I want to know all my legal and professional expenses. So you want to use consistent categories. If you do want to make something like this, you might want to find a chance to talk to your accountant to understand, so that it's in a way that's the most helpful for your accountant, that you're not wasting your time and you're not wasting their time. But a nice thing to do also is ask your accountant, is there a time of year that's better for us to talk about these things? Because there are times of year that are more pressured and other times of year when your accountant might be a little bit more calm and generous with their time. So the way that this particular sheet works is that it feeds into an overview. So this is specifically for US citizens because I want it in US dollars. But what it does is that it takes all, you can see it has some code in here. It takes all of the advertising expenses. It converts anything that was marked as shekels into dollars, and then it gives us the totals here. So as a US accountant, I want to know the totals per category, and I'm going to usually trust you to keep track of your receipts, especially since I'm working with Israeli accountants who are usually stricter than me, so I can usually trust the Israeli accountant that they're making sure things are above board. Since we're talking about US citizens, I just want to go touch on just a couple quick things that are different between US and Israel to keep track of. One is mileage. If you're a US citizen, speak with your accountant, but if you are using your car for your business, you're supposed to be keeping track of mileage. The other thing that's different is home office expenses. So from what I understand, if you're working at your dining room table, your Israeli accountant can still take a percentage of your home expenses, mostly utilities, and not rent. But for US purposes, if you're working at your dining room table, you can't take any of it. But if you have a dedicated home office used exclusively for work, I don't mean a guest room. The US probably isn't going to come to Israel to check, but technically, even if you have a guest stay in your office a single day, this is like an example the IRS gives all the time. Even if you have a guest stay in your office like one day a year, it's not considered exclusive use. So be careful with that. Technically, it should be exclusive. It doesn't have to necessarily have a hard door. It could, but it needs to be an office space that you use that is separated from the rest of your living area, that is used exclusively for your work. And generally you can't take that if you're also an employee. So you have to be only self-employed, and it has to be exclusive for your work. And if it is, Then, unlike Israel, we can take a percentage of your rent and your mortgage interest, or rent or mortgage interest.
You can take in Israel
Okay.
also. Actually.
Okay.
We can also depreciate part of the original cost of the house here.
Okay.
But rent, we can't take no matter what, unless it's, you get a receipt from your landlord for actual business rent, we won't be able to use it.
Okay. So most things between US and Israel are pretty similar. Most things, I'm going to take from the Israeli accountant as a US accountant. Usually they do it first and then I look at it, but then I'll ask a few questions. So if your US accountant isn't asking, then, ask them about things like that if it might be relevant to you, mostly car and home office. Um, so we had a question about if you need to file your American receipts with your Israeli receipts.
So you're talking about, I am assuming we're talking about expenses.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but answer both.
Okay, so if we're talking about expenses, yeah, definitely include them in your report. And if we're talking about income and you're not within your 10 years of Aliyah, I don't know what you mean by American American receipts, but if you're talking about foreign currency income that has to be reported here in Israel. If it's foreign currency, it has to be exchanged into shekels on your receipt based on the Bank of Israel exchange rate on that day. If it's income generated when you're outside of Israel, as we said, if you're within the first 10 years from Aliyah, that won't be reported here. You still have to issue actually a receipt for ma'am purposes because the benefits for Olim Chadashim don't count for ma'am purposes, but that income will be excluded from your profit and loss statement for tax purposes. There was a question about whether the receipt date is when the money is received or when the service is rendered. In most cases, small businesses are working on a cash basis. So you'll be issuing the receipt on the date that you actually received the payment, even if, for example, you provided a service in 2020 and received the payment in 2021. This will be considered income in 2021 based on the date that you actually issue the receipts. I'm just skimming through the chat.
How do you know what a receipt is for, Chana, when you're looking through somebody's folder, clean, organized folder of receipts?
How do I know what the receipt is from? What do you mean?
Yeah, like if they, let's say, you mentioned like you might need to depreciate it. So how do you know from the receipt?
Okay, so we look at the actual receipt. First of all, receipts that are for at least a few hundred shekels would raise some kind of red flag. And then we look at the details in the receipt. And if you purchased a computer, you purchased a new printer, you purchased a program that costs a few hundred shekels and will be used for a few years, it's not just a monthly or annual subscription, those would all indicate that we're talking about something that has to be depreciated. If these are getting back to the foreign expenses for a minute, they're not relevant for ma'am purposes because you aren't actually paying Israeli VAT on them, but they are relevant for tax and bituach leumi purposes. They are considered part of your
If
expenses.
someone is within their first 10 years of Aliyah, then they need to be keeping track separately of any work that they do outside of Israel and any expenses that are related to that work done outside of Israel. If they're US citizens, they still need to report 100%, so it's really important. And if they're working in any specific state, that has other consequences. So definitely speak with your accountants about your personal situation to make sure you're keeping track of everything very carefully, because it's always easier to keep track of it when it's happening and not try to figure out what happened later. Receipts that you issue to clients, you don't have to print those, right?
Right. Now, if you're using the digital program, as long as you're still working with the same program, you don't actually have to print those out because they're digitally signed and they're all, in the cloud. If you do decide to switch programs, then it's highly recommended to download all of the receipts that were issued, because for Israeli tax purposes, you have to keep all of your income and all of your expense receipts for at least the year that your tax return is filed. So if we're talking about 2020, and your return will be filed in 2021, you have 2021 is the first year and 6 years after that. So we're talking about 7 years in total that you actually have to hold on to your income and expenses for Israeli tax purposes. And this is assuming you didn't do anything illegal. In that case, they could always come and 20 years later, come and try to look through your books.
Yeah. People talk about the expense of having a business, and you have to remember that space is also an expense. When I took my first job, I was a secretary of sorts, and they gave me a bunch of notebooks I had to keep. I had such a small part. I said, I'm only getting paid like 50 shekels an hour, and I have to keep this in my tiny apartment. Like, I shouldn't have taken this job. So you do need space to keep your stuff organized, in addition to scanning all the receipts so that they don't fade. Before we move on, just because I don't want to forget, with the scanning receipts. So again, find a system that works for you. So again, let's say you do use the Microsoft suite for everything. Open your phone and check out Office Lens. Office Lens is a great tool that works with a Microsoft suite that takes really nice pictures of your receipts and everything. Sometimes I see people take pictures of their, whatever tax statements, and their toes and their knees are all in it. So Office Lens is really nice. It looks really clean. It ups the contrast. It's like really meant for documents. It like crops it all automatically. And you can also make different folders, and you can have it upload directly to your OneDrive. So you could, like, let's say you only use it for receipts. Now, instead of having your camera have a bunch of mixed receipts and pictures of your kids or grandkids, now you have all your receipts. If you only use Office Lens to take pictures of all your receipts, you can have them upload directly to your OneDrive or your Google Drive or whatever, but they're all going to be in one folder. So think of some way like that where even if you're using your camera, maybe use a different camera app or some way that they all automatically get into a separate folder. So you're not at the end of the year or month, hopefully at the end of the week or the month, sorting through the pictures of your, dinner you made and your pets and your receipts all together. Do all the programs that are authorized by Mas Haknasa, do they all have conversion rates?
I hope they do. I don't know. I haven't gone through them, so I don't know.
It sounds like Chev does not want to relax and do her receipts over her afternoon tea.
If you take pictures of your receipts, though, keep in mind you have to keep the hard copy.
Yeah, keep the hard copy, definitely.
That won't change that.
Yeah, the receipt is a backup for when it fades or it's unreadable, or if, God forbid, you do lose it. But so let's say you buy a computer program online for your business. While your credit card is processing, that is the best time to go ahead and log that expense. So if you are keeping a running list of expenses on your phone or on your computer or whatever's the most handy for you, hopefully an electronic source, then do that. Figure out something that works for you, that every single time you make a purchase, it becomes a habit to log it in a way that works for you. Now, maybe you are really a very analog person. Maybe you do have your calendar and everything in your little journal in your pocketbook. So I can understand why you might want to also use that system for all your expenses. The problem is that then you still have an extra step of sitting down and putting it into something where it can add it all up. And so your accountant can add it all up. And so giving your accountant a scan of your journal where you've manually added something up is not ideal and not really going to make your accountant super happy. So even if that works for you now, I'd like to encourage you to go the next step and try to cut that stage out so you can go directly to something electronic. Because once you have it electronic, then it's very easy to get it into any other format. Let's say you're using a Google Sheet or Excel or something. Once it's in there, you can rearrange it. But once it's on paper, then it's one more step for you to write it down or hand it to one of your kids to write down, or your office manager or something. But if you can try to skip that step, even if it's with your phone, there's so many things in your phone where you can just put it in automatically, but try to get into a habit of using a spreadsheet directly. I want to share my screen one more time because I did forget to mention something here that's really important. When a lot of people are starting out, they might write out like let's say like 83 shekels and 52 USD. And then if you see, you can't add these things together. It's not going to give you a sum where you can add together 83. I mean, hopefully this is really basic for some people, but it's worth putting in. So don't put anything except numbers in the number cell, please, or we will not be able to add it together. And it's a lot easier for your accountant to check your work if it's in an Excel and they can just check and make sure that it goes to, that it matches up. So when you're writing numbers, make sure all of it is actually in number format. When you're writing dates, make sure they're actually in date format. One thing that I like to do is put in, usually like if you are using Excel, one thing that you can do is you can format cells, and I like to use one of the formats where it's really obvious what format it's in. So you don't have any confusion if it's US style date, Israel style date, if it's the date way at all. If you're using Excel, let's say I put in 9999, and it in my Excel, it jumps to 1999. You want to make sure that the format isn't 2099 or something. So if you have Excel in this format, then it'll be really clear that the date format's right. And you're going to need the date format if you're using different currencies. You may need it. So that things like that, make sure things are formatted. But once you learn those little techniques, it's very easy to rearrange things, to check your work, to sort different expenses. So really, like, first start with just making sure you're recording things, and then you can always resort it and whatnot. Some people are saying Airtable is awesome. I actually haven't personally used Airtable. Whatever you have that is most handy, use that. Airtable, I'm guessing you could export to an Excel or something if you needed to, but really just whatever is the device that you reach for the most, see if that can keep track of your expenses. So you need your paper receipts, you need your scan or very clear, not blurry photo of your receipts, and some sort of running total by category, preferably. Can you add to that, Chana?
I'm just going to say that the reason, like one of the reasons you want to keep track of this during the year is not only for the Osek Patur limit, but also for Bituach Leumi purposes, also for tax purposes, also for pension purposes. You really want to keep track of what's going on throughout the year so that you can make adjustments throughout the year as well. For Bituach Leumi purposes, for example, if you don't make an adjustment throughout the year, let's say there's a jump in your profit and you don't tell Bituach Leumi during the year, they'll only find out about it when your tax return is filed, and that could be even almost a year later. And then meanwhile, that amount will be accumulating interest, and Bituach Leumi is still going to expect you to pay them as opposed to paying it off as the year goes by when you're actually receiving that income. Sometimes, even the next year doesn't look the same. Your income is different. So if you can pay off Bituach Leumi as your income is actually coming in, it'll make your life much easier. Besides the fact that part of the Bituach Leumi payment is deductible for Mas Haknasa purposes, and that it'll help lower your profit that year also.
So I want to give you guys a goal. I think we've basically covered most of the best practices, and then I want to go into some of the challenges you guys are having personally. So if you guys could open your calendar and mark, let's say February 15th, and put on February 15th and say, what were my total 2021 income and expenses? I want you to, by February 15th, be able to figure out within minutes what your total expenses were so far for the year and what your total income was so far for the year without having to do a lot of extra calculations. And so hopefully by then you can form some of these good habits where you're writing receipts as soon as the money comes in, you're writing down your expenses as soon as the expenses come in. The next thing you can ask yourself is, do I know where all my receipts are? But really, if I were to call you up and ask you, hey, quick, something, their Mas Haknasa is giving some grant, or Bituach Leumi is giving a grant, or the US is, giving some grant for people that made exactly this amount of money, tell me your income and expense right now. Could you do that? And I think hopefully if you're using these tips, that shouldn't be too hard and it shouldn't be too stressful. And that's really what I want you guys to get out of this, is that find a system that doesn't cause you stress, where it really just becomes a habit. And then you're proud to give your information to your accountant because you're doing things in the best possible way. And when it comes to making your accountant happy, there are a lot of good reasons to do that. First of all, if you answer, I'm just going to say for myself, if you answer my emails really, really quickly, there's a good chance I'm going to respond to you in the same way, because I'm going to know that that's what you expect from communication, and that's the way that you value your tax filing, is that you feel that this is important and urgent. And I'm going to make sure that I do your taxes urgently. I mean, not because you wait till last minute, hopefully, but because you're all organized. You've come to me, when it's not a really pressured time, because you're one of the first people to hand me your documents, and I can do it calmly and carefully. And, hopefully I'm not making mistakes even when I'm not calm, but, I can take the time to answer your questions and ask you questions, and take the time to go over things with you, and say, hey, maybe if you did things in a certain way, you could make more money or save on taxes. And if you come to me the month of the deadline, I might not have time to do that. So coming early and showing that you are organized and your documents are in good order, and answering your accountant's questions as quickly as possible is going to show them, even subconsciously, that this is important to you. If somebody doesn't answer my questions for 2 weeks, I've kind of forgotten about it. Like if they're missing one little piece of information, it takes them a long time to get that back to me. I've moved on. And now when I have to go back into their file and finish their tax return, I have to reassociate myself with the whole thing. And it takes me a lot longer to prepare the tax return, because I have to re-review everything. And so that can be frustrating for me. The more disorganized you are, the more work it is for your accountant. So they're probably going to have to pass some of those expenses on to you, and you probably want to save as much money as possible. So, the more organized you are, the early in their year that you get your accountant information, that can help your fees. It can help how much time your accountant has to answer your questions. And it just really shows that this is important to you, and your accountant is going to treat you that same way. But what I don't want to encourage, at least my clients, to do is don't not ask me questions because you're worried about your price quote going up. I want to ask your questions I want to answer your questions throughout the year. I much rather you ask me questions that maybe you don't know if it's relevant to taxes. I'd rather you ask me a dozen questions that might not be relevant, and not miss asking me something that really could save you money or save me time. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you're my client and you have questions. Chana, you want to say anything on that?
I totally agree with everything you just said. Also, I just want to add, if you are keeping track of your income and expenses throughout the year, which I hope you will be doing this year, from our perspective, when we receive your information, it's easier for us to review it when your income is separated from your expenses, and your expenses are separated by categories. We don't really need the monthly breakdown. We're more interested in your total yearly income, your yearly expenses, because all the tax authorities look at your totals. They look at your average monthly profit at Bituach Leumi. They look at your annual profit at Mas Haknasa. They look at your annual revenue at Ma'am. All these places aren't really interested in your monthly income and expenses, except for this year, specifically with the Corona grants, when the grants are based on your actual revenue during every 2 months compared to the same 2 months in 2019. For that, it's not clear yet how we're going to have to report that to the government. But definitely if they ask you to show them, that you really were eligible for the grant because there really was a 40% decrease in your revenue in those 2 months compared to the same 2 months in 2019, you have to have some kind of proof of that. That's not something that we would have because we're not keeping track of your income every month. We're looking at the totals, okay? Bituach Leumi is looking at your average monthly profit. They're not looking at your specific monthly profit, okay? They're looking at your average. They feed off of the same profit that's reported to Mas Haknasa. So even if you have one good month and then a month where your income is lower, Bituach Leumi is not going to ask you for specific month by month income and expenses. They're looking at your annual revenue also.
Okay, so that someone asked about that. So it's both revenue and profit?
Bituach Leumi is looking at your profit. Mas Haknasa is looking at your profit. Regularly for tax issues, for the grants, they're looking at your revenue, okay? And Ma'am, the Osek Patul limit, they're looking at your revenue also, just revenue.
I just want to define a couple of those terms just in case anybody's not clear. Revenue is the gross amount that you bring in before any expenses. Profit or net profit is generally your total revenue minus your expenses. The form revach v'hafsed, I usually think of revach as being profit, but it's called a revach v'hafsed, which means profit and losses, but really it's your revenue and expenses, right? How you want us to arrange the information. Okay, so I think you answered how you want to arrange it. So not month by month, the total, and the same for US purposes. I want total expenses by category and then total income. Separating it beyond that would be if you're within your first year, 10 years of Aliyah, then I'm going to need to know what was earned in the States or maybe specific states, what was earned in Israel. You said it's important to keep track monthly income. Okay, so you answered that also. Can we hear, does anybody have any challenges they want to bring up or tips, if anyone wants to share any specific tips that has really helped them? I know people probably have to go back to work now. So why don't I say thank you so much for joining us. It was an honor to have you all. As I said, I will be giving out our contact information. If you're not our client, then it is a good idea. Not that we don't want to talk to you, but please do consider reaching out to your own accountants because you want to have communication with them, not because we want you to leave us alone, but because it's really important to have communication with your own accountant. If you find yourself in a situation where you're not comfortable talking to your accountant for any reason, you need to think if that's really the accountant you should be using. Obviously, there are always budget considerations, and budget is important, and I understand that, but it really is so important, so worthwhile that you do have an accountant you can talk to. So find somebody who you're comfortable communicating with. Sometimes I say, like, if you call your accountant and if you feel like you don't want to talk to your accountant because you're worried, like they make you feel stupid when you talk to them or things like that, like if that's keeping you from approaching your accountant, you need to find someone who you can talk to. It's just so important to your business and your organization, everything, that your accountant is approachable.
I totally agree with that. I think that at the end of the day, as accountants, the information we have to relay to the tax authorities is based on the information you give us. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking to your accountant and sharing that information with them, then you're going to be losing out on things that could be helpful for you.
Okay. So anyone who needs to get back to work, that's fine. I'm willing to stick around a little bit longer to answer some questions. I don't know, Chana, I know it's a really busy time of year for you. Do you need to head out or do you want to stick around for another few minutes? Okay. So I'm just going to run through some of the other questions we're getting. So what kinds of expenses might we not have thought about? So anytime you pull out your credit card, think, is this for my business? And that's likely a business expense. Likely. I mean, like I have seen iTunes and things like that, and you're going to have trouble convincing someone. I know, especially artists, you need your iTunes, to do your art, but I'm not comfortable taking it. So definitely separate stuff that's personal. Cell phones, usually I think half and half you take.
Yeah, we take 50% in Israel.
Yeah. So, but whenever you're pulling out your credit card or, PayPal or whatever, your wallet, think, is this something I'm buying to further my business? It's likely a business expense. We do have a few more, questions, which you can ask your accountant, usually necessary, for your business. But I mean, there's necessary, and then is it growing your business? Yeah, that's necessary to grow your business.
I think the most common expense that unfortunately is not deductible in Israel is when you take clients out for business meals, which is not relevant now during the lockdown, I know, but definitely is when there is no pandemic. And that Israel specifically states that they will not deduct those expenses. You can deduct 80% of light refreshments that you have at your office or at your home when you're sitting with the client. So we're talking coffee, tea, some cookies, things like that. But if you take them out for a business meeting and you drink coffee there in the coffee shop, that won't be deducted for Israeli tax purposes.
For US purposes, not only in the past, it was 50% deductible. Part of COVID relief, because I think they want to get people started to go back to restaurants as soon as they can. It's actually going to be 100% deductible, at least for 2021. It might still be up for debate, but definitely if you are taking clients out safely and when that's acceptable, keep track of those expenses separately if you're a US citizen, and ask your accountant if that's relevant, because it could reduce your taxes there. It's good. Another difference is begadim.
The good clothing in Israel is deductible really only if it has your logo on it. Or if it's, you need you're an attorney and you need a special cape to go to the courts here. Work clothes, if you're a cosmetician and you have a like lab coat kind of thing, that's fine. But just regular clothing, because you have to look more presentable, things like that, unfortunately is not deductible here in Israel.
So speak with your accountant, but definitely you can't just throw all of your clothing on your.
You wouldn't be able to do that anyway.
The U.S. is even much more strict about that. So if you're a U.S. citizen, don't bother pushing that. Let's see, skimming through. Another tip: paying for your accountant and paying for tech apps to make accounting easier are business investments. Absolutely, business expenses. And not only that, I know it's a little late to be telling you this in January, but one of the ways that I encourage my clients to hurry up and pay me is that I say, I know that you want that expense for 2020. And so I do really try. I tell them they have to, you got to get me it like by mid-December if you want me to make sure that I can get you that receipt in time. Now, I generally do my receipts same day, but I'd rather them not wait until December 30th to pay me, or December 31st. December 31st is like, no way there. It's because it's not going to get to my bank account in time. Shameless plug for Chana Engel. Absolutely. Who always makes me feel less overwhelmed by all this stuff. Yes, I love working with Chana. I'm so glad that she could finally join us.
I work with Yosefa as well, you should know. I work with a few US accountants. You can just tell that she's really a professional and she knows her stuff. She's on top of things.
Thank you. Chana, are you taking new clients right now? I don't know if I want to put you on the spot about that. I know you're very busy. I think it depends.
In a few weeks.
Yeah, same for me. I actually had a new employee start on Monday. So we will see. Thank you. Is there a place where there's a list of expense categories? Oh, what a great idea. Okay, well, if this isn't your first year in business, so look at your last year's Rebach said. That's going to show some things. Is there a list? I think every accountant's a little different. Every accountant uses a little bit different terminology, it seems to me.
Yeah, I actually like making specific lists for clients because some expenses may be relevant for some and not relevant for others. So I don't have a general list, but I think Yosefa's
I'll share this again.
More about Is this an expense that's related to your business? That underlying question is really usually answers the question of whether you should be keeping the expense and reporting it for business purposes or not.
Yeah. If you're a US citizen and you want to get a list, just Google Schedule C or IRS Schedule C. That's going to show the general categories, but they haven't updated that in so long. So like there's no category there for internet, even though that's one of people's most biggest expenses. Anything that doesn't have a category you can put under other. So you don't have to fit it into those categories. That may give you some idea of at least some of the wording that you might want to use. How do you send a receipt for PayPal payments when the amount you receive is different from the amount someone paid?
Okay, so
You have to change the invoice.
the
No?
receipt itself has to be for the amount that the client actually paid. The fact that PayPal has their 5% fee or 4% fee that they take off, that's actually one of your deductible expenses. So the receipt will be for the full amount the client paid if you look from the client's perspective, and the PayPal fees will be part of your expenses. So your bottom line will show whatever you actually received. Your profit will be whatever's left over after that. I think it's possible to generate an annual PayPal statement that shows the total fees you paid during the tax year. So definitely make sure to download that and give it to your accountant so they can take it into account when they compare your profit and loss statement. There is no ma'am included here, so it wouldn't be something that you'd be reporting every 2 months if you're an Osek Moshe.
I think a Green Invoice might handle that automatically if you have PayPal connected to Green Invoice. There's a lot of payment if you do use Green Invoice. I don't know of the other ones because I've only used Green, but I can, if I do a cheshbon iska, then I can offer people credit card or PayPal. I don't do it as a default, except on like payments under a certain size. But if I'm taking relatively small payments, I do give them the option to pay by credit card because then it automatically generates the receipt. So you might want to consider, if you really hate writing out receipts, then you could just let everyone pay by credit card, and then if you're using Green Invoice, you have to get hooked up. It's not the easiest thing. You have to go through a bunch of steps, search in the IWEN group because people have talked about it. But once you get your business all approved with a credit card provider, then it's really simple. You just, you check the box that says you're allowing them to pay by credit card. They get a link that says pay online. And then they click, they pay online, and the receipt is generated automatically. I don't have to do anything else. And also, if you're using Green Invoice, and I'm assuming the other ones have it as well, you can set up for your invoicing. You can set up the names of the things that you sell. So like I can basically generate an invoice in like 2 clicks because I click on the client name, I click on invoice, maybe a few clicks. And then I click on what I'm doing for them. Let's say I'm doing a 1040 plus FBAR. So I have a relatively standard fee for a lot of these things. So like I just click that and it just pops up with the fee. I change the fee if theirs is more or less, but it just all pops up there. You don't need to, and I'm guessing most programs do this. You don't need to be typing out what you did for every single client. You don't need to be cutting and pasting from your notepad or your Word document. Look at your software and see if it can automatically generate a lot of the things that you find yourself writing again and again. PayPal plus Green Invoice integration is super convenient. The only downside is if you want to integrate PayPal with anything else like shopping cart website. Yeah, a lot of integrations are a pain because of Israel, I would say. Like I'm using I use a specific client and project organizer system database cloud that's specific for tax. But it doesn't integrate with Green Invoice. So I have to re-input everything. So it is a little frustrating as a native English speaker that you want to use certain things that are really common among English speakers and you can't necessarily integrate with the Israeli approved billing systems, but it does have a lot of integration. So check it out, see what can save you time. Is it important for small business to have a separate bank account? Oh, what a great question. What do you think?
So it's not a requirement. Tax authorities don't require small businesses to have a separate bank account. but it is highly recommended for, keeping track of what's actually happening in your business. Otherwise, your income and expenses get swallowed up in your household activity. Instead of just, having a bottom line, and that's another way to have a bottom line, what's happening in your business in front of your eyes all the time. You log into your bank account and you see, okay, this was your income this month, these are the expenses that came out, and you know exactly how much you have left after that.
I'm guessing if you were to get audited, God forbid, it would probably also be a lot easier, just look better, much better, and look much more professional.
Not a requirement.
I think in general, it's a great idea, but I want to point out a couple drawbacks. One, if you are getting paid by Bit or Paybox or something like that, I'm not going to go into legally, that stuff, but let's say you are getting paid by Bit, you have to make sure that Bit is connected to the right account. So if you're using Bit mostly for personal stuff, and you have a separate business account or vice versa, whatever, you have to make sure that the expenses and the income get in the right place. The way I do it is I'm married, so I have my husband hooks up his Bit to our personal account. If I need to pay something personally, I tell him, and mine is hooked up to my business account. So when clients do pay me, which sometimes they do without even asking me, they pay into Bit, and then that automatically goes into our business account. I don't have to worry about moving it, and sometimes I pay certain business expenses from there also. It's really easy to do that. And it shows up in the bank account like a regular bank transfer. So again, I'm not like legally, I don't work for Bit and I can't tell you what their small print says, but it does look like a bank transfer. And so the receipt gets written out like any normal bank transfer. And I like to be able to send, like if someone either tells me they want to pay from Bit or just has been ignoring my invoice, then I can send them a Bit request. It makes it really easy for them. Also, if you're a US citizen, you are going to have to report that additional account on your FBAR. It'll be considered your own personal account. You're owning it. So even if you're Ba'am, if you're 100% owner of the Ba'am, you're considered to be owning your business's bank account. So, but it's not such a big deal to add one more bank account to your FBAR. So I think mostly it's beneficial.
Regarding Bituach Leumi, pension contributions, Keren Ishtalmut contributions, those are partially deductible depending on how high they actually are. And Bituach Leumi also has a mas briut portion. Those aren't you won't see them as part of your profit and loss statement. They're part of the tax return, actually. That's where they're taken into account. So if you're keeping track of your income and expenses, you should, of course, treat them as an expense. But for tax purposes, they'll show up differently and may not be deducted in full.
Okay, I think that wraps it up. Thanks again. I'd be happy to hear feedback. As I said, this is our first meeting, the first meeting that I've ever hosted this size. Hopefully next time I'll get there a little early and figure out the technical stuff, but I would be happy to hear any feedback you have. Thanks so much. Thank you. Good luck with your VAT reporting.
Yeah, thank you.